Today we're taking on one of the hardest RMC concepts you could possibly attempt, Wild One from Six Flags America. This coaster isn't just old, it's 108 years old, making it the oldest ride in the entire Six Flags chain. On top of that, its classic out and back layout removes space for creativity. Today we are going to take on this very difficult challenge as we look to transform this legendary coaster into a modern day RMC beast. Hello everyone, welcome back to TH Designs. Today we are back with another RMC conversion. Coming off of a few weeks ago, we did the Thunderhawk Recreation, which was the oldest coaster in Cedar Fair. That video did very well, it seems like you guys wanted more, and after doing the Wild One Recreation, the oldest coaster in Six Flags, there was plenty of requests to RMC that coaster. So that is what we will be doing today. And this one poses a very different challenge to Thunderhawk. While Thunderhawk did have an out and back layout, it was more dynamic and more creative, and it's kind of spread out a little bit more, giving us some room to work with when it came to converting it into an RMC. For Wild One, we don't have that luxury. Let's jump over into the recreation and talk about it. So here we are in game on the map where we recreated Wild One. If you haven't seen that video, it was a very fun video to do. Of course, I recreated the ride, but along with that, you not only see the step-by-step design process, you learn a little bit about the history of this coaster because it is 108 years old, and unfortunately this past season it ran its last run. Most likely this thing is probably going to be torn down, unfortunately. With that said, as I was saying before, this coaster has a very standard out and back layout, which is very different than what you see on most RMC conversions, which this is why this poses such a unique problem. But it's all just one circuit. With most RMC conversions, the old coasters had multiple circuits. And we will talk about some precedents before we get started, but I just want to talk about how peculiar this layout is going to be. We also have this huge helix at the end, which could pose to be problematic because that's just not very RMC. They don't have many helixes really at all on their layouts, so there's some room for creativity but also a lot of restriction in a way. Let's jump over to some of RMC's precedents, their portfolio, and let's see what we can take away and maybe what we can adopt for this conversion. So here we are on Google Earth, and of course we are looking at the very first RMC conversion from 2011, and that is New Texas Giant. You can see the post RMC layout here, which is very spread out, much more spread out than some of the usual conversions you see. Let's take a look at what it was before the layout, and you can kind of see why this may be a problem. So here's the coaster 2 years before it was converted. You can see how spread out. I mean, typically what RMC does when they convert coasters, they are monster wooden coasters. They are typically not these very small out and back layouts, so that certainly poses a problem. And it also kind of lends itself towards the fact that RMC does not typically touch coasters that are very old. This is the oldest coaster RMC has ever converted. The original Texas Giant was only built in 1990, which relative to the Wild One is not that old. This coaster was only about 20 years old by the time it was converted. We're talking about a 108-year-old coaster. You can take a look at Twisted Timbers in King's Dominion. That has a smaller layout. Of course, it was the original hurler. If we take a look at that old hurler layout, even this is pretty spread out, and it kind of lends itself to what I was saying before, where typically these conversions, these old converted coasters, had multiple circuits. As you can see, most RMC conversions follow the original footprint pretty exact. I think there's one coaster that we'll probably be referencing the most, and ironically it's the same one that we referenced in the Thunderhawk video. That is Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. And the reason I mention that is because it's such a small layout. You can see here, pretty small layout. It does have the circuits like I had mentioned before, but we're only talking like 540 feet in length, and just in terms of just dimension. But really, Wild One, which you see here in Google Earth, is kind of unique to the idea of being converted into an RMC. Like I pointed out before, Cyclone, which was probably the smallest converted one, was 500 feet in length. We're talking over 1100 feet in length, so literally over double the length. So what is lost in circuits is made up, I guess, in distance, so it's technically the same amount of track, just spread out further. Jumping back in the game, I think we're just gonna have to just get at it. What we're gonna do in this video that I did in the Thunderhawk video is we're gonna slowly tear down this ride piece by piece by piece and replace it with the RMC replacement. I'm gonna keep the station as I always do because this station especially is so iconic. I'm such a huge fan of the Wild One station. Alright, there is the new train replaced. Now, Wild One is actually fairly tall for how old it is. We are looking at about 97. I think the real height is 98 feet, which is pretty impressive for a 108-year-old coaster. I almost want to keep these flags because that was pretty cool point in the original build. I'll put those there for now. Maybe I'll keep them, maybe I won't. So I'm going to build a little pre-lift section, something small, short, and sweet. And as for the height, most small RMCs typically are around that 100-foot mark. I know Twisted Cyclone is. Wicked Cyclone is also not too far. I know there's a lot of Cyclones. When you're looking at like the Steel Vengeances and the new Texas Giants, those guys are massive. So we're probably not going to be near that area, but we are going to try and keep it relatively realistic and honor the original layout as much as we can while still making this an awesome coaster. Alright, so there we are with the lift hill done. We are at 113 feet, so I raised it up about 15-20 feet or so. You see a pretty simple pre-lift section. As for this, I actually do want to get rid of this. I'm going to do what I did with Thunderhawk and what you see on RMC conversions like Steel Vengeance, where the transfer track is actually just coming out of the station. This is really the only space where I think a transfer track is even reasonable, so I will make something there at some point. Like I said, 115 feet. We're going to dive down steeper than we see here, and then we're going to dive into this first airtime hill. And this is where we are posed with, what do we do? Like we did on Thunderhawk, we could also do here where we did like a high five kind of element. I don't really want to do that. I'm more interested in making this more about inversions and ejector airtime. Thunderhawk was a little bit more about speed and ejector airtime. I want this to have a lot more inversions than Thunderhawk did. So I'm thinking maybe we just add a 0G roll or something like that. But let's say that I replaced it like for like. Let's say we went 0G roll, and let's say we did some kind of modified double up and then into some kind of classic RMC banking with some Outerbank airtime hills and all that, and into a double down. That's not that exciting. It's also not that, I feel like I don't know, I feel like the bang for the buck isn't really there. I would love to extend this more and have it wrap around this one last time. So maybe when we're coming back down, I do some kind of turnaround here where it wraps around the tower, does another circuit, and then continues. But I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So for now, I'm going to delete the hill here on Wild One. All right, so there's the drop and the first element done. I ended up going with a stall, an element that you would typically see underneath the chain lift. And I think we have the opportunity to do something kind of cool here. The stall immediately after the drop felt about right, and then we have a moment to have an element peek underneath this, not as like a Top Gun stall, but just as like a vista to make it look cool if we had like an Outerbank turn. And of course you're coming directly underneath the original Skull Mountain. So now it looks like the next thing to do logically would be to do a double up, maybe even a triple up, with how aggressive we could do it compared to the original wooden track. Maybe that's what we'll do, and then we'll have like that typical RMC huge overbanked and outerbank turns that you see on like Steel Vengeance or Hokuge. And I'm just going to build a double up or a triple up. I'm just going to build some huge monster structure and then prepare ourselves for a possible second loop and make this into a real RMC beast. Alright, so here is my turnaround, which is very strange, kind of funny because we've been talking about precedents for pretty much the entire first half of this video. This turnaround, I don't think has much precedence whatsoever. So I mentioned a triple up going into this, and I did end up doing it. Gave it some kind of nice bends, kind of similar to what you see on Lightning Rod. It exits with this kind of awkward 0G roll. I might have to fix that profiling. But it exits like how Twisted Timber drops. And then it exits that 0G roll into another down. So technically it's a double down element. So this thing is an airtime machine, this element here. So now, let me get rid of this track quick. So I think I'm going to add a turnaround before this entrance and have it wrap around in another circuit similar to what you see on something like Steel Vengeance, Twisted Cyclone, Wicked Cyclone. Literally almost any RMC has a second circuit underneath a larger element. So I'm going to do that now. I'm probably just going to make it a pretty basic wide overbank turn because we are coming in pretty hot. I'm going to have it bank, and then it's just going to go and lap underneath itself. So I'm going to do that, and we'll check in probably when we're exiting here, and then we can talk about how we're going to finish this ride. So this thing, I didn't have super high hopes for, but this element brought me right back. This thing looks insane now. Alright, so here is a very spaghetti mess looking thing without the supports. It looks very strange, but you can kind of see the general premise of it overlapping underneath itself. Yeah, so we left off on this double down. I said I was going to do that overbank turn, and it does do that. Then it goes into this small airtime hill, which dips down, takes it at a really nice speed into another kind of 0G roll, and then it just does some kind of pretty basic banking and turning on a turnaround, something you typically see on almost any RMC when it's lapping underneath its structure. Then it goes into an airtime hill, again something you see on many RMCs and Twisted Timbers in that finale. And then it goes into this this is an element you typically don't see on RMCs. This is almost more of like an intimate blitz element. Thought that would be kind of neat. This thing is a conglomeration of every RMC element I can think of. I'm just trying to make this legendary coaster into a complete freak show while also kind of keeping it somewhat realistic, honoring the original layout, and to be honest, just having fun with it. Why not? If we can make this work, then this spaghetti bowl of incredible elements that look like they'd be a lot of fun, let's do it. You can see the train coming through at the speed it is. That's a nice moment. That's pretty realistic. These are pretty standard overbank turns into that airtime hill, which that has some really nice ejector, and then this moment here, and now we're exiting right next to where the stall is. So I'm thinking of doing an outer banked airtime hill similar to what we did on Thunderhawk. I think a vista point when you're coming near Firebird here looks very cool if we have an outer bank and a stall directly next to each other. So I'm going to build that quick. Alright, so there's our outer bank turn done. Looks just like the one on, and I think underneath the stall it looks really neat. While I was building, I was actually wondering if an RMC this size would need a mid-block section. The answer is probably. I'll probably put it here on this little awkward strip, which is what we're tacking next. And I'm thinking double up into a mid-course break section, and then do the finale. So yeah, I'm probably gonna stop right before this helix and figure out how to attack that, but otherwise pretty standard stuff. Alright, so I finished the mid-course break run. Kind of nice and cozy, looks like it belongs there, so I'm pretty happy with that. The double up is fairly solid into it. It takes it at a pretty nice speed. I did lower the friction multiplier a bit just to keep the pacing going rather than having to adjust the lift hill like we had to do with Thunderhawk. So I lowered the outer bank turn to get some more speed going there. That looks like it's taking it at a nice speed. You can see the speed in which it's coming into the mid-course break run is good. I don't actually have it stopped because trims are for losers.
Oh, what a loser!
So now for the helix, which typically is not on RMC, so this is a strange element for sure. So I'm thinking of doing a modified one. Typically I would just move past it and just put my own element, but I feel like this helix is actually pretty legendary for a wild one. If you watch the recreation video, I talk a little bit about how the layout changed because of the multiple fires that this coaster had to deal with, and I believe that the helix was one of the things that stuck. I have in mind something similar to how we did the turnaround, where there's like different degrees of banking but generally keeping the shape of a helix. So I'm going to work on that, and then I'm probably going to replace this break run with some final airtime hills, probably some final turnaround here into the final break run. We'll figure it out, but to be honest, next time I check in, the layout may be completely done. You can see it going through the elements now, and it looks pretty solid. I'm a fan of it. I like how it goes through these last two airtime hills. I kept the transfer track where they store the second Wild One train. I thought it was such a unique piece of the original ride, so I decided to keep it, and it fills in this space around the go-kart track pretty nicely. So nice little homage. I think generally that wraps it up. I'm really curious what the statistics are going to be for this ride. I think they will be all green. I'm really curious how the length of this ride and the G-forces stack up against some of the bigger RMC conversions that have ever been built. But I think that this layout is very wacky, very different. So I'm gonna get to decorating it and making it look like as if it were a proper conversion of the original Wild one. I will see you when everything is all done, and we can talk about stats, we can talk about the final ride, and of course the POV and the cinematics. So I will see you then. Alright, we are back. I've touched up all the scenery, all the supports, all the coloring, the train design, all of that fun stuff, even a new logo for all that. The name of the ride is New Wild One, and I know it's kind of boring, it's unoriginal, it's not that creative, but it's a little bit of an homage to the original RMC, which we've talked plenty about in this video, being New Texas Giant. Also, if you were to play with the typical steel, twisted, wooden, timber, whatever that RMC conversions typically do, steel one or wild timber or wild iron, they don't really sound that great. So, and that logo with the Centennial logo is awesome, so I just tweaked it a little bit. Now the color of the track is of course white, as we talked about. Not very many in America that are colored white, so in that way it's kind of unique. We do have red accents on some of the major supports just to get some red in there, because of course the original Wild one is all white with red trains, which is where you see these trains, which are still all red with very minimal theming. I didn't want to go too crazy. Really what you're seeing is just a little vintage kind of style New Wild one on the front with some stars and stripes on the side, kind of keeping it a little bit American, that kind of the vibe Wild one gives off. This support structure is tweaked off of an RMC chain lift / 0G stall from the workshop. I just painted it white and tweaked it up a bit to make it fit onto the coaster. It's a little overkill, it's a little exaggerated, but I've never had an excuse to use it, so I used it. Overall, I think it looks super solid. I mean, this whole thing is just a mess, but I've been on the POV multiple times. I've done plenty of smoothing, because let's talk about the stats and let's talk about the G-forces on this thing. So we are super close to being all green. Really the fear needs to be 4 for it to be green, but unfortunately we're at 3.96. I assume it's because it sits at the block section a little longer because I have to space the trains apart. If I made this 1 train or 2 trains and it didn't have to wait at the block sections, that probably would be all green. But let's look at the results of the test. We are sitting kind of near the threshold of reasonable for a realistic coaster. Average speed is only 29. I imagine again that's because it's stalled there. If you actually look at the speedometer during the ride, it's well over 30 for the whole ride. Max speed of 56.6, that's actually pretty tame. 4,500 feet track length, that's up there with the Zadras and the Steel Vengeance, the Iron Guazis, the big boy RMCs. So I'm pretty proud of that number. If you're looking at the Thunderhawk video we did, that was probably around 25 to 2,700 feet. Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia is 2,400 feet, so very small. This doubles that, so I'm very happy with that. Now for the G-forces, we do have a max vertical G-force of 4.66, which is a little high, but I don't think it's that unusual for this coaster. Now for where that actually is, I assume it's here. That looks like it's the darkest purple. You can see moments of 3.5. You do have 4.26 there. I don't actually know why. It's not really going that quickly around there. I think for a coaster going this fast, going this aggressive, I think going over 4 is fair. It's reasonable. As for the negative, we are at negative 2.45, which is pretty aggressive ejector. So that's probably all happening right here. That looks like it's the most blue. Yeah, that's the most blue I see. I could smooth that out if I wanted to. I don't know. I kind of liked it in the POV. I don't really want to change it. Either way, I just wanted to show those to show that the ride is relatively realistic. It could be better, could certainly be worse. And for the transfer track, I had to get a little creative because I remember we talked about it during the design of the layout that the transfer track was going to be before the lift hill right after the station, just like Steel Vengeance. The actual storing of the 4th car or 3rd car would be on this track here, which actually goes directly above the little pre-build section. But yeah, otherwise, nothing too crazy to talk about. I did include those flags, just like the original Wild one. Put the logo on there. I think that about covers it. I don't think there's anything left to do besides to watch this POV. I really hope you guys enjoy it. I really hope the Six Flags America people that suggested that this ride be RMC'd enjoy it. Because this is the oldest coaster in Six Flags, and now it is a big time RMC. This is no joke. There are some elements here that are pretty crazy. Is it unrealistic? Maybe. There's an argument for it. Is it fun? Certainly. And I think that's what it's all about. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the POV, and I hope you enjoyed the cinematic. And let me know if you want to see more of these in the future. There's been plenty of positive feedback after the Thunderhawk one, so I'm glad I got another one out. Do take care and enjoy.